In the southern valley of Eldenmere, nestled between golden fields and fog-touched hills, there sat a town called Brenwick, quiet, modest and known for three things: its spring cider, its midsummer festivals and its seamstresses. They were famed for their needlework, bold patterns, precise seams and thread work delicate enough to please even the court's choosiest tailors. And among them, one name had begun to surface more and more, whispered with the kind of reverence usually reserved for temple prayers or lucky omens: Leone. She lived on the eastern edge of town in a small, slanted house with a sagging roof and one warped shutter that refused to close. Her late mother had been a seamstress too, famous in her day not for flair but for detail. Every hem she stitched held like steel, every pattern sang quiet harmony. Leone had learned by watching, sitting beside the fire as her mother guided the thread through linen and wool with fingers worn thin by years of quiet excellence. Now that gift lived on in Leone's hands. She never boasted of it. In fact, she rarely spoke much at all. Her voice was soft, but her stitches spoke clearly: floral embroidery that curved like real petals, border trims so fine they looked printed, and hidden seams that never unraveled, even after harsh winters and careless handling. People began to say she had magic in her fingers, though Leone never claimed such things. She only smiled, lowered her head and kept sewing. But she was not alone in the house. Her father, after Leone's mother passed, remarried a woman from the western coast who brought with her a daughter from a previous match, Khalees. Khalees was everything Leone was not: loud, confident, beautiful in the way statues are, angular and perfect, with golden curls and eyes like cut glass. She wore bold dresses, lacquered her nails with berry stains, and carried herself like royalty, even though her mother's lineage was far from noble. Where Leone worked with quiet precision, Khalees worked rarely and with loud complaint. She dabbled in fashion but lacked the discipline for fine sewing. She started many things: dresses, shawls, headpieces, and left most of them unfinished or sloppily done. But Khalees was clever in a different way. She knew how to turn heads, how to make her presence felt, and how to play the part of a girl destined for more. She also knew how to watch. She saw the way customers praised Leone's work. She saw the way merchant wives leaned in to ask if Leone could take on special commissions. She noticed, with growing disdain, how even the mayor's wife once left a coin tip on Leone's work table, not for the household but for Leone alone. That resentment bloomed slowly at first: sideways glances, whispered judgments, deliberate interruptions. But as Leone's reputation grew, so did Khalees' bitterness. What did Leone do to deserve such praise? She barely spoke. She dressed plainly, wearing her mother's old dresses until the fabric frayed. She never flirted, never laughed loudly, never took her work to the town square to display. She simply sat and stitched. That was enough to earn admiration? That was enough for people to whisper her name like it was some blessing? Khalees decided it would not be enough anymore. "Why don't you teach me how you do your flower knots?" Khalees once asked, feigning sweetness as she leaned against the doorway of the sewing room. Leone looked up from her hoop. "You usually do your own style," she said gently. "Yes, but yours are so dainty. I could use some refinement." Khalees stepped forward, brushing aside a curtain to let more light in. Leone hesitated, then nodded. "All right. It's a twist stitch. You loop the thread twice around the needle like this, see?" She showed her, slow and patient. Khalees leaned over, watching closely. Too closely. A few days later, one of Leone's favorite customers returned with a scarf Khalees had stitched, using Leone's exact flower pattern. The stitches weren't as clean, but the design was unmistakably hers. Leone said nothing. She merely went back to her own work. But Khalees noticed the way her mouth pressed thin. The small flicker of disappointment. It wasn't enough to ruin her day, but it was something. That was how Khalees worked now. Not in loud cruelty but in small thefts, in whispers that couldn't be traced. She took Leone's designs, claimed inspiration, and made sure their mother praised her for it. She let her mother believe Leone was falling behind, becoming lazy, too timid to seek out new customers. It didn't matter if the work said otherwise. People saw what they were told to see, and Khalees was very good at telling. Still, Leone endured. She had her private dreams, the kind she told no one. At night, when the candles were burned low and the house quieted to creaks and sighs, she would take out a small bundle hidden beneath her bed. Inside, a length of pale blue silk, some fine silver thread, and a design she'd spent 3 years perfecting, an embroidered piece meant for the royal showcase, held once every 5 years. The winner would become royal embroiderer, a title of great honor and guaranteed patronage. Leone had never sent her work. She hadn't dared. Girls like her, Poor, soft-spoken stepdaughters with no name or noble blood weren't meant for courts or palaces. Still she stitched the dream. Slowly, carefully, line by line. One day perhaps, when she was brave enough. Her father had passed 2 winters ago, after falling ill during a flood season. He'd been kind if distant, more tired than cruel. But once he was gone, Khalees and her mother ruled the house. They took most of Lena's commissions, pocketing the coin and leaving her just enough for thread. They made her cook and clean and mend all their garments, often with mocking praise. "You're so good with your hands," Khalees would say sweetly as she dropped a torn petticoat in Lena's lap. "Better to stay here, I suppose. The court would just eat you alive." Still, Lena didn't retaliate. She found solace in her needle, in her small circle of returning customers who asked for her by name. She stitched in silence, letting her thread carry what her voice never said. Until the day everything changed. It began with a cloak. A royal courier arrived in Brennwick on horseback, soaked from unexpected rain and torn by travel. He stopped by the market and asked for a local seamstress to repair his frayed cloak and reset a sigil that had come loose. The mayor's wife, without hesitation, pointed him to Lena. He arrived at the door, tall and solemn, with mud on his boots and silver cords at his shoulder. Lena bowed low and asked for the garment. He watched her work closely, not rudely but with curiosity. She mended the hem, reset the gold thread of the sigil, and stitched a border of fine spirals along the edge, not necessary but elegant. "Your work is finer than many in the palace," he said quietly when he returned. "What is your name?" She hesitated. "Lena." He nodded, paid her more than double the usual rate and left. 3 days later a letter arrived. It bore a small royal seal, not the prince's but an official mark of palace correspondence. Inside, a brief note thanking her for the work, signed by the prince's steward himself. It mentioned that the prince had seen the cloak, had asked who repaired it, and had requested that Lena's name be recorded for future commissions. Lena held the letter like it might vanish in her hands. She didn't tell anyone. She tucked it into her bundle of silk beneath the bed. But Khalees found it anyway. She tore into Lena's room in a rage 2 days later, holding the letter like it was poison. "You dared go behind my back to the court?" she hissed. "I didn't," Lena whispered. "He came to me." Khalees' lips curled. "You won't go any further. I promise you that." Lena said nothing. But in her eyes something shifted. And Khalees saw it just for a moment. A glint of something dangerous, belief. The storm came down from the mountains in sheets, loud and fast, drenching Brennwick in cold rain and turning the dirt roads to sludge. Most merchants shuttered their stalls early, and townsfolk dashed from street to porch, cloaks pulled tight around their shoulders. But one rider didn't stop. His horse was slick with sweat, his boots crusted with travel, and the fine blue cloak that billowed behind him had a silver sigil, half moon over a rose, that marked him as no ordinary traveler. He rode directly to the mayor's residence, delivered something unseen, then made one simple request: a skilled hand to repair his garment. The rain had torn a seam at the shoulder, and the silver embroidery was unraveling. It was not a task for clumsy fingers or novice stitchers. Without hesitation, the mayor's wife said, "Take it to Lena." And so he did. Lena answered the door with her sleeves rolled, fingers stained from dye, and a thimble still perched on her thumb. She blinked at the man on the porch, tall, broad-shouldered, hair dampened by rain, and at the heavy blue cloak folded neatly in his arms. "You're Lena?" he asked, his voice rough from the cold. "I am," she said, stepping aside to let him in. Inside, the small hearth crackled. The scent of rosemary bread drifted from the oven. Her workroom was humble but orderly, threads sorted by shade, shears gleaming, fabrics hung with precision. The courier looked around with the faintest glimmer of approval. "This needs repairing," he said, unfolding the cloak. "By tomorrow." Lena ran her fingers over the fabric. The shoulder seam had split near the insignia, a palace crest. But more than that, the threads had loosened where the rain had soaked through. Water damage, likely to fray if not handled gently. She nodded. "I can do it," she said. "And clean the stain near the hem." He raised a brow. "You noticed that already? It's where the mud dried faster. That means the fabric is thinner. Easier to tear." The courier grunted. "Good eye." He laid it across her work table, left half his pay up front, and said he'd return by dawn. Then, without further word, he stepped back into the rain and was gone. Lena worked through the night. She stitched beneath candlelight, unspooling silver thread so fine it caught the flicker of the flame like wire. Her fingers moved without hesitation. Not simply mending but improving, stabilizing the base fabric, adding a subtle inner lining to prevent future damage. Along the seams she embroidered a soft vine pattern, barely noticeable unless one looked closely. A touch of elegance, hidden grace. It was the kind of work she loved best. Unspoken, careful, lasting. By morning the cloak looked better than new. She folded it neatly in linen, set it near the door and sat with tea to wait. The courier returned just as the sun broke through the clouds. He examined the cloak without speaking, fingers running along the repaired seam, noting the smoothness of the stitch, the hidden detailing. When he looked up, there was something in his expression that hadn't been there the day before. "Thank you," he said, handing her the rest of the coin, "and then some." Lena bowed her head, but before she could speak he added, "This is exceptional. The prince will want to know who did it." She froze. The prince. The cloak is his. I'm his courier. You've done him a great service." And with that he turned, slinging the cloak over his shoulder, and left. Lena stood there stunned. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear but something close to wonder. The prince would see her work. The very idea seemed unreal. Still she said nothing to anyone. 3 days passed. Then just after sunset a knock came at the door. Khalees opened it. A rider stood on the step, dry this time, holding a scroll case. It bore the same insignia, the silver half-moon over a rose. Without asking, Khalees took it and shut the door. Her fingers trembled as she broke the wax. Inside was a letter addressed to Lena. Lena had just returned from delivering an order of wool shawls. She stepped through the door, damp and tired, to find Khalees standing in the center of the room, letter in hand, eyes like flint. "This came for you," she said, her voice syrupy and sharp. Lena froze. She saw the seal. The edges of the scroll still curled from where it had been rolled tightly. "From the palace?" she asked quietly. "I haven't read it," Khalees lied, though her nails bore the faintest curl of blue wax beneath them. Lena took it gently, opened it slowly and read the contents. To Lena of Brenwick. "Your repairs to the cloak belonging to His Royal Highness were noted with great appreciation. His Highness has asked that your name be recorded among the list of recommended craftsmen for future commissions. Your skill reflects honor upon your town and station. In admiration. Steward to His Highness, Crown Prince Theon." It wasn't much, not in length. But it bore the prince's crest. And in royal matters, even a whisper from the palace could echo for years. Lena read it twice. Her lips parted, but no sound came. "You think this means something?" Khalees said, scoffing. Lena looked up, blinking. "It's only thanks," she murmured. "It's more than that," Khalees snapped. "Don't pretend you don't know." Lena stepped back, tucking the scroll into her satchel. She didn't want an argument. Not now. Not when her heart was full of something rare and bright and still so fragile it might crumble under anger. But Khalees wasn't done. That night, as Lena sat stitching quietly near the fire, Khalees paced the room like a caged thing. Her eyes darted toward the satchel, her jaw clenched. She saw it all now, what this could mean. If Lena's name was truly recorded, she could be summoned again. She could be brought to court. Given a title. A stipend. Worse, she could be seen. And if Lena was seen, then Khalees could be forgotten. "I've worked just as hard," Khalees muttered. "I've studied the court's fashions. I know how to speak, how to walk, how to present myself." Lena said nothing. "They won't care about a thread mouse like you." Quiet little Lena, who never speaks above a whisper. Still Lena did not answer. That silence enraged Khalees more than words ever could. She slammed a bundle of cloth onto the floor. "You'll see. That letter won't change anything. You don't belong in the palace. You don't belong beside princes." And for the first time Lena looked up. Not angrily. Not afraid. She simply met her stepsister's eyes and said, "Maybe I don't. But my work does." Khalees faltered. Just for a moment. Then she turned on her heel and stormed upstairs. Lena sat very still. The fire popped gently. The wind outside stirred the shutters. And inside her chest, her heart beat with a steady, new rhythm. The next morning, Lena returned to her embroidery with quiet focus. She unfolded her private piece, the one she'd kept hidden for so long. The pale blue silk gleamed faintly in the morning light. She ran her fingers over the silver thread. The design was nearly finished. A circular motif with 12 leaves, each one different, each one threaded with a symbol of the months, the stars, the moons. A full cycle of the year captured in silk. It was her dream piece. The one she once believed would never leave the house. Now, perhaps it would. She began stitching again. Upstairs, Khalees watched from the banister, unseen. Her teeth were clenched so tightly her jaw ached. She paced her room for hours, tossing gowns out of trunks, muttering to herself, wondering what she had to do to remind the world that she was the one meant for courtly halls and noble eyes. Not Lena. Never Lena. When her mother returned that evening, Khalees dragged her aside. They whispered for a long time behind closed doors. Later that night, the steps of their home felt colder. Lena didn't notice. She was still stitching by firelight, her fingers moving surely, her back straight, her mind filled not with revenge or anger, but with shape and color and thread. She didn't know yet what that letter had stirred. But Khalees did. And she would not let it go unanswered. The air shifted. It wasn't sudden or loud. There was no outburst, no slam of a door or scream in the night. It was softer than that, quieter, more insidious. Like a thread pulled slowly from a seam, invisible until something comes undone. It began with a single customer. An older woman, kind-eyed and consistent, who had always ordered her festival dresses from Lena. She came as usual one morning with fabric in hand and a warm greeting on her tongue. Lena took her measurements, made tea, and discussed the flower detailing the woman wanted at the cuffs. They laughed about how her granddaughter always tried to match the embroidery with her ribbon shoes. The next day the woman returned, flustered and strangely cold. "I've decided to go with another seamstress," she said, refusing Lena's offered tea. Lena blinked. "Did I do something wrong?" The woman wouldn't meet her eyes. No, it's just, I heard someone said your stitches don't hold. That the last dress you made unraveled in the wind." Lena's breath caught. "That isn't true. I double knot all threads at the hem and sleeves. I've never had a complaint." The woman only shrugged, murmured something about how people talk, and left. Lena stood at the doorway long after she was gone. By the week's end, 2 more clients had withdrawn orders. One never came to collect a finished blouse. Another sent her daughter with coin, but refused to place future commissions. When Lena asked the girl why, she bit her lip and said, "My mother says you're too busy now, ever since the prince's letter. That maybe you've become proud." Lena's heart sank. She spent her days stitching until her fingers cramped, her evenings rechecking every seam and hem. There was no pride in her work, only care. Only necessity. She began to hear things. A merchant whispered to another at the market that Lena's fame had gone to her head. That her prices had doubled. That she used cheap thread now, covering it with charm. Someone else claimed she used palace marks illegally, mimicking the crest in hopes of drawing noble attention. None of it was true. Lena kept her head down, saying little, working harder. But still, the rumors crawled through Brenwick like ivy, soft and steady, winding through doorframes and shutters, curling beneath every conversation. Khalees smiled more than ever. She walked the market in her finest dresses, offering gentle warnings to those she passed. "Just don't be disappointed," she'd say sweetly. "Lena's been ever so busy since her little letter. I'd hate for her to ruin your wedding gown by mistake." She handed out scraps of fabric from her own wardrobe, suggesting that if they wanted something elegant done right, she could recommend a tailor she trusted. One in the next town over, of course. One where real nobility shopped. At night, she returned home humming, pleased with herself. Her mother watched with approval. "A little competition is healthy," she said, sipping wine by the fire. "If Lena can't protect her name, perhaps she doesn't deserve it." But Khalees wasn't satisfied with lost clients. She wanted Lena removed. Forgotten. Ashamed. She began asking questions in low-lit taverns. Who had influence in Brenwick? Who owed favors? Who liked a beautiful face and a discreet conversation? It didn't take long. Judge Horwick was a minor authority in the region, a local magistrate with a taste for bribes and a weakness for flattery. He was known to turn a blind eye when coin was involved, especially if a charming girl delivered it with a smile. Khalees dressed carefully when she went to visit him. Not in anything garish, just something soft and flattering. A dusky blue gown with silver buttons. She brought a small parcel of sweet cakes and a pouch of gold her mother had saved for emergencies. Horwick greeted her with a leering smile. "What does a lovely young lady need from an old man like me?" Khalees played the part well, bashful and trembling, casting her eyes down, saying she didn't know where else to turn. "It's my stepsister, sir," she said, voice soft and breaking. "She's not well." "Not well?" Horwick asked, already intrigued. "She's delusional," Khalees whispered. "She believes the prince sent her a marriage proposal. She's spreading lies. It's humiliating." Horwick chuckled, the sound thick and unpleasant. "A common girl with dreams above her station? That's not uncommon." Khalees nodded. "But she's beginning to upset the peace. People are arguing. Clients are accusing each other of stealing designs. There's been yelling in the market. I fear she may be unwell enough to cause real trouble. She paused. Let the lie breathe. Then added, if something were to happen, a temporary detainment perhaps, maybe she could get help. Horwick leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. A little time in the village jail might calm her down. But I'd need something to offset the risk. She slid the pouch of coin across the table. And your silence, he added. She hesitated, then smiled, slow and knowing. Of course. They made the arrangement. He would draw up papers, accusations vague enough to sound believable. Claims of forgery or misusing royal favor. He'd wait for the right moment, then have Lena taken. A quiet matter. No trial. Just a lesson. Khalees left his office with her heart racing. At home, Lena sat at her embroidery table, unaware. She hadn't slept well in days. The rumors pressed in like walls. She'd stopped going to the market, asking her neighbor's boy to deliver finished garments. Even he had begun to look at her strangely. But still she stitched. Not because anyone demanded it, but because it was all she had left that made sense. Thread followed rules. Patterns had order. Her hands knew what to do even when her heart felt uncertain. She was working on a small commission now, just a baby's blanket for a baker's new child. But she stitched a secret into the border, a single moon among the stars in pale lavender thread. It made her smile, if only faintly. When Khalees returned that night, she watched Lena from the doorway. You're still working, she said flatly. Lena didn't look up. Yes. Even after everything people are saying? Especially after. Khalees laughed, cruel and low. It won't matter. They'll see what they want. Lena finally lifted her gaze. Maybe. But I know what I am. Khalees' smile didn't reach her eyes. Do you? Then she turned and walked away. 2 days later the guards came. Lena was preparing spools when the knock came, 3 firm raps on the door. She opened it with a cloth still wrapped around her palm, thread clinging to her skirt. The men wore brown leather uniforms. One held a scroll. The other held shackles. Lena of Brenwick? The first asked. Yes. You're under investigation for impersonating royal authority and defrauding local patrons. Lena stared at them. What? What does that mean? The man unrolled the scroll. It means Judge Horwick has issued a detainment order. No trial? She asked quietly. He shrugged. You'll be held for questioning. Behind her, Khalees stood in the shadow of the hallway watching silently. Lena looked once over her shoulder, searching perhaps for some trace of pity, some sign this wasn't what it looked like. But Khalees only tilted her head. And said nothing. The guards stepped forward. And the door closed behind them. They brought her to the hall before the sun had risen. Brenwick's courthouse was narrow and gray, the stone walls always damp and the small windows just slits that let in more wind than light. The chamber smelled faintly of mildew, as if the walls themselves were rotting from secrets held too long. Lena sat at the bench, her wrists still sore from the journey, though the chains had been removed. A few villagers filled the seats behind her, people she once stitched for or greeted in the marketplace. Their eyes avoided hers now. Whispers rose like dust. She was always too quiet, someone murmured. Royal embroidery, they said. A letter from a prince. Sounds like delusions to me. Lena stared ahead. She wanted to believe this was a mistake, that reason would prevail. But the weight in her chest told her otherwise. Something had been set in motion and it was no longer about truth. It was about control. She'd felt the same thing once as a child, when she caught her stepmother burning one of her first hand-stitched handkerchiefs in the fire. No words had been exchanged. Just a look. A dismissal. A warning. The bailiff called for order. Judge Horwick stepped in from the side, his robes trailing behind him like smoke. He moved heavily, a man accustomed to being obeyed rather than trusted. His mouth was already set into the lines of a decision made long before he entered the room. Today we hear the case of Lena, daughter of Alan the Stitcher, he said, unrolling a parchment. Accused of theft, namely the unlawful taking of property from the manor of Lady Varence of Belmere Hill. A low murmur ran through the room. Lena's heart thudded. Lady Varence? She had made cuffs for her last month, laced with ivory-threaded trim, delicate and expensive but all accounted for. I didn't steal anything, Lena said, rising slightly from the bench. Every piece she ordered was delivered and every coin returned in kind. I have the logs. Horwick raised a hand. You will speak only when called upon. She sat, biting her lip. Khalees hadn't looked at her since she entered the room, though she sat beside the noblewoman now, a thin veil over her face and a tragic curve to her mouth. Playing the concerned sister. The loyal daughter. A servant was called first, Varent's housemaid. She was short, red-faced and nervous. "Tell the court what you saw," Horwick said. The maid glanced at Lady Varent's, then back to the judge. "A day after Miss Lena delivered the embroidery, I noticed a length of the manor's silk lace had gone missing from the storage chest. It was rare. Imported. Only one bolt remained and it was gone." "Had anyone else accessed the room?" Lena asked quickly. "Silence," Horwick barked, banging his gavel. The maid flushed and added, "A neighbor said they saw Lena pass through the manor side gate that evening. Said she walked alone." Gasps rippled through the seats. Lena stood again. "That's not true. I was home that evening. I didn't return to the manor. I delivered the cuffs 2 days prior. Khalees was with me." "She knows that." The judge's eyes narrowed, turning to Khalees. "Miss Khalees, you accompanied the accused during the initial delivery?" Khalees nodded slowly, eyes downcast. "Yes, Your Honor. But I remained outside the manor while Lena went in." She hesitated, just long enough to seem reluctant. "I didn't see her leave anything behind, but I didn't see all that she carried either." A sick sensation settled in Lena's stomach. "You're lying," she whispered. The gavel struck again. "Order." Lady Varent spoke next. She was as sharp as her gowns, pale silks that seemed untouched by air itself. "I did not wish to press charges," she said with a tight smile. "But when I learned the lace was missing, and then heard Lena had previously claimed royal notice, I began to wonder if her talents were matched by ambition." "She never had any right to a prince's letter," Khalees said in a low, loud enough whisper. "That was a lie too." Lena's cheeks flamed. "That letter was real. I never said anything more than what it was, a thank you for embroidery, nothing more." "Convenient that no one has seen it," Horwick murmured. "Do you still possess this letter?" "No," Lena admitted. "It went missing from my drawer the same week the rumors began. I believe. So no proof of innocence. And damning testimony from a noble woman, a servant and your own family," Horwick said, marking something down. Lena's voice trembled but didn't break. "Your Honor, if you'd just let me show my stitching logs, my deliveries." "We've heard enough." The room quieted. Horwick stood. "Though the theft was minor in value, it is a theft nonetheless, and worse, committed by one who deceived others for social gain. You are hereby sentenced to 30 days in the village jail for defrauding a noble household. A second offense and you will be marked as a criminal under regional law." "Wait, no." Lena stepped forward. "You can't." But the guards were already moving. She was led out of the room as voices rose behind her, some curious, others triumphant. Someone tossed a pebble. Another muttered, "Little liar." She caught one final glance of Khalees' face. Smiling. The cell was no larger than her sewing cupboard back home. It smelled of old rain and iron. The walls wept at night and the straw mat was thin and stained. She sat with her arms wrapped around her knees, head resting on the stone, trying not to cry, not out of pride, but because even tears had started to feel like wasted energy. She thought of her mother. Alan had died quietly, just a fever and then sleep. But she remembered her voice, soft and steady, telling her that stitches weren't just thread. They were stories, promises. "Your hands will never lie," she had said once. Even when others do. So why had no one listened? Why had no one questioned how easily a girl like Khalees was believed? On the 5th night, the jailer brought a bowl of broth and muttered, "Someone's been asking questions. Noble ones. Best keep quiet if you want to walk free." Lena looked up. "What do you mean?" He snorted. "Just that nothing stays buried forever." When he left, she pressed her palms to the floor. She didn't know who had asked about her, or why, but for the first time since the cell door had closed behind her, something within her flickered again. A thread of hope, small and unwinding but real. Maybe someone believed her. Maybe the truth wasn't dead after all. Just waiting for the right hands to unspool it. They did not take her straight to the jail. Perhaps it was a gesture of mercy, or perhaps it was mockery disguised as lenience, but the judge declared she would remain under house arrest until her formal sentencing at month's end. 2 guards were posted at the door of the cottage. They never entered, but their boots thudded heavily outside at every hour, reminders of how little freedom she still had. Inside, the house was no longer hers. The rooms felt different. The light dimmer, the corners sharper. Lena moved as if the walls would close in at any moment. Her bed had been stripped, her tools were gone. All but a single basket of mending left behind, as if someone thought she might as well be useful while disgraced. Khalees came often, her laughter always arriving before she did. "My dear seamstress," she said one morning, tossing open the front door with no regard for privacy, "how strange to find you surrounded by your own walls, yet nowhere to go." Lena didn't answer. She was kneeling in the hearth's glow, unpicking a seam on an old woolen shawl. Her stitches were slower than they used to be. Her hands moved, but her mind floated just above the fabric, distant, unmoored. Khalees held something in her hand. A blackened scrap of paper. "I thought you might want a memento," she said sweetly, holding it out. "Remember this?" Lena didn't need to look. The corner bore the faint remnants of a royal seal, now half melted and torn. "You burned it," Lena said softly. "I preserved it," Khalees replied. "You should be grateful. If anyone knew you were still clinging to your little royal fantasy, they'd think you truly were mad." Lena looked up then. Her eyes weren't angry. That would have been easier for Khalees to dismiss. No, they were steady. Quiet in a way that made Khalees hesitate for just a breath. "You're afraid of something," Lena said. Khalees blinked then laughed. "Afraid? Of you?" "No. Of what I still remember." Khalees' smile faded. She dropped the burned paper into the ashes near the hearth and stepped back. "Don't get clever. You've already been judged." She left with a toss of her braid and a sharp click of the door behind her. Lena didn't move for a long time. The ash smoldered quietly beside her. She didn't pick up the letter scrap. She didn't need to. The words were burned into her memory more than the paper. "Your handwork speaks not only of skill but of spirit. I would know the artist behind such craftsmanship." She had read that line 100 times before it was stolen. Now it hummed inside her like thread under tension. That night, she found her mother's hidden basket in the crawlspace behind the hearth. It was where she used to store her personal patterns, ones never shown to clients. Some were torn. Others faded. But Lena pulled them out one by one, laying them across the floor in rows, smoothing each one with care. She chose a pale piece of muslin, frayed at the edges, and began to stitch. She didn't know what she was making. Only that her hands needed to move. Each night, after the guard's boots quieted and Khalees stopped visiting, she would take out her work. In the mornings she folded it away again. But it grew, inch by inch, color by color. A vine curled across it first. Then stars, silver and quiet. Then a single open eye, surrounded by a halo of gold thread. She stitched the truth she could not say. In her embroidery she was free. Word spread slowly that she was still sewing. Some in town scoffed, saying it was desperation. Others wondered aloud whether shame had finally broken her. But a few remembered her work, how it had calmed grieving mothers and restless children. Her stitching had always been quiet but never empty. One morning a knock came at the back door. The guards didn't move, they weren't paid to watch anything but the front. Lena opened it to find an old woman, hooded, holding a bundle of cloth. "I heard you still mend," she said, offering it with trembling hands. "It's just a shawl. My daughter wore it once. I don't need it fixed. I just want her memory held in thread." Lena nodded. She took it gently with both hands. That night, she mended it, deliberately, reverently, adding a single line of deep blue down the edge. A river, subtle and sure. The next week another knock. Then another. People came in secret. Small things at first, a child's bonnet, a soldier's cuff, a widow's sleeve. They didn't speak much. Some left coins. Most left only thanks. But they kept coming. The guards never questioned it. So long as Lena didn't try to flee, they didn't care who passed through the back. Khalees noticed, of course. She burst in one afternoon, her hair tousled, her eyes bright with irritation. "You're still stitching?" she hissed, snatching up one of the finished cloths. "You think this will save you?" Lena remained calm. "No. But it will remind me who I am." Khalees threw the cloth across the room. "You think you'll be remembered for your thread?" "Yes," Lena said, her voice like wind through a needle's eye. "Because I leave something honest behind." Khalees' mouth twisted. "You always think virtue is enough. That people care." "They do," Lena said. "Eventually." Khalees sneered, then turned to leave. "Not before your trial. Not before your name is carved as thief and liar." But even as she said it, she hesitated. Lena noticed it, the flicker of unease. Because no matter how tightly Khalees spun her web, Lena had found something that couldn't be taken: purpose. That night, she added a final symbol to her growing cloth. A flame, small and steady, burning in a ring of thorns. She knew now that this was more than a pattern. Was a record. A memory held in fiber. A quiet protest. A girl's truth stitched in plain sight. By the end of the month, the cloth was nearly 5 feet long. She had sewn dreams into it. Sorrows. Joy. The shape of her village. The shadow of betrayal. The flicker of something like hope. And she was not the only one who had seen it. One of the guards had mentioned her work to his wife. His wife had spoken to a merchant. The merchant, in turn, had a cousin in the capital. Small things. Trivial almost. But thread travels where voices fail. On the eve of her sentencing, a bird came to the windowsill. Not a real one, a paper bird, folded from fine parchment and tied with royal string. The guards didn't see it land. Lena opened it with shaking hands. No words. Only a symbol. The same one she had stitched, the eye surrounded by a ring of gold. She pressed the paper to her chest. Then carefully she folded it back and tucked it into the lining of the cloth. Her prison had no bars. No locks. Just a house that felt smaller than before. But in her hands she held a story no wall could contain. The cloak had been passed through many hands since the day Lena last touched it. It had traveled from the courier's shoulders into the royal laundry, where dozens of hands worked in a rush of steam and soap, day and night. In the palace, garments came and went like whispers, washed, mended, pressed, forgotten. But this cloak was different. Annalai, the laundress who eventually unfolded it, wasn't one for gossip or glamour. She'd worked the palace laundry for 12 years and had seen silks torn by drunken nobles, mud-caked boots that once stomped across sacred halls, and even a bloodstain or two no one dared to explain. But she remembered this cloak. It was the courier's, a dark, tailored thing with silver trim that marked him as a direct emissary of the crown. It had been left for cleaning weeks ago and somehow slipped behind a stack of ceremonial robes. As she turned it over to inspect for wear, she noticed the lining. A small unevenness. Not a flaw exactly, but, curious, an inconsistency where the fabric met the hem inside the collar. Seamstresses in the palace were exacting. Any mistake was grounds for reprimand. Yet this wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate, subtle but intentional. Annalai lit a lamp and took her needle. With great care she opened the inner seam. And there, between 2 layers of folded lining, stitched so fine it nearly disappeared into the thread itself, was a sigil. Not the courier's, not a house crest. It was small. Intricate. A silver moon arching over a pair of leaves, twined around the initials LM. Annalai stared. She had seen the royal seal enough to recognize its shape, even hidden in thread. And she knew these weren't markings for identification. They were personal. They were prideful. They were secret. A memory stirred. Whispers in the lower halls of the palace laundry. The prince had once sent a letter, not a summons, not an order, but a note of gratitude. To a seamstress. For work so fine it bordered on sacred. A girl whose name was never publicly shared, but the story had drifted through servants like perfume. Lena. That was the name. Some said she was from the North Village. Others said she vanished. Annalai folded the cloak and brought it straight to her overseer. The cloak passed hands again, this time with urgency. By dusk it reached the prince's chamber. Prince Thalen stood at the window, his expression unreadable. When the steward presented the cloak and spoke of the initials, he said nothing for a long moment. Then he turned, took the garment and laid it flat across the table. His fingers traced the seam. The fabric still carried the faint smell of forest and wood smoke. He reached inside the collar and saw it. Silver thread, nearly invisible to an untrained eye. His own sigil. The initials. The memory of the letter returned to him at once. The fine embroidery of the cloak's collar had caught his attention because it was unlike anything he had seen. Not ornate for vanity's sake, but measured, thoughtful, alive. He remembered writing the letter himself, insisting it be delivered by hand. And now, the seamstress who made it had vanished without explanation. Where was this cloak found? He asked, his voice low. In the laundry, your highness, said the steward. Misplaced. Not misplaced, the prince murmured. Silenced. He dismissed them all with a nod and sat alone in the silence. In his hand he held the cloak, not as a garment now but as a message. The prince was not a man easily swayed by court gossip or sentimental whims. But this stitch spoke louder than any noble's whisper. It spoke of someone reaching out even while they were being pushed into shadows. He summoned Captain Wren, commander of the palace scouts, within the hour. I need everything you can find on a seamstress named Lena Merrill, the prince said. Start in the eastern villages. Discreetly. Wren, a woman of few words, nodded once. Accusations to clear? Possibly, he said. But more than that, I need to know why someone with such skill would disappear just after receiving royal notice. Ren bowed. Consider it done. Meanwhile, in the village, the house arrest continued, but something shifted. Lena felt it before she knew it. A stillness in the air. The guards stood differently, less casual. One of them, a younger man named Tom, watched her more closely, not with suspicion but with unease. As if he'd heard something. That evening, when Khalees arrived again, she was quieter. No mocking, no games. She stood in the doorway longer than usual, fidgeting. Still stitching, I see, she said, eyes darting to the cloth Lena folded at her side. Lena nodded. It keeps the mind from falling apart. Khalees gave a strained smile. Don't get your hopes up. It won't change anything. Lena tilted her head. Did something change? Khalees flinched slightly. Nothing important. The trial is still set. The judge is still prepared. But her voice didn't carry the same certainty. Lena let her go without another word. She had grown used to silence. And now it comforted her more than false kindness. 2 days later, a man arrived at the village gates asking questions. Not loudly. Not officially. But with purpose. He was seen speaking to the midwife, to the baker, to the tailor who had once employed Lena as an apprentice. Then he came to the manor where Khalees had danced her lies. She wasn't home that day. But the servants remembered Lena. Remembered her quiet diligence. Remembered how her work never frayed. Ren took notes on everything. By the end of the week, a folder sat on Prince Thalen's desk, thick with statements, quiet testimonies, and a timeline that showed a very different story from the one filed in court records. At its center, a cloak. And a girl whose signature was stitched in thread because no one would let her sign in ink. The prince stood, taking the cloak in his arms. Have the record sealed for now. And prepare a carriage. I'll ride to the village by dawn. Ren blinked. Your Highness, if I may. No more silence, he said. No more distance between truth and justice. By the time the sun rose, the royal crest gleamed on the prince's carriage as it rolled down the dirt road. Lena heard the wheels before she saw it. The guards stiffened at the gate. People poured into the streets. Windows opened. The village held its breath. The carriage stopped at the little house where Lena sat sewing in the doorway. She didn't rise at first. She thought it might be a dream. But when the prince stepped out holding the cloak she had stitched weeks ago, her hands fell still. He walked slowly, his steps respectful. I believe this belongs to you, he said, holding it out. She stood. Took the cloak in her arms. Her fingers ran over the collar, then the seam. Her breath caught. You found it, she whispered. He nodded. I found more than that. The guards looked between each other, confused, unsure whether to kneel or bolt. Khalees appeared from the road, eyes wide with disbelief. She began to speak, but the prince raised a hand. This woman, he said, turning to the small crowd that had gathered, was framed. Hidden. Silenced. He faced Lena. I can't undo what was done. But I can say this, I see you. And I believe in what you made. Lena looked down at the cloak. Then at the long cloth still folded behind her, embroidered with every truth she couldn't say. For the first time in weeks she smiled. A hidden stitch had found its way to the surface. And so had she. The knock on the judge's door came early, too early. He was still finishing his morning tea, a bitter blend brewed with an herb only the old district wives used for stubborn digestion. The sharp rap sounded again louder. He rose stiffly, muttering under his breath, and opened the door to find a man in the livery of the palace. The seal on the letter the man carried was unmistakable, the royal sigil pressed into deep blue wax. The judge's stomach dropped. He did not speak as the letter was handed over. The courier bowed once and left without a word. Back inside, the judge tore the letter open with trembling fingers. The parchment was thick and crisp, the handwriting neat. No preamble. Just a single royal command. All proceedings concerning the girl known as Lena Merrill are to cease immediately. She is to be brought to the capital under royal protection for re-evaluation. Any interference will be treated as obstruction of justice and disloyalty to the crown. Below, the seal again. Heavy. The judge sat down. He had thought the matter settled. Lena Merrill was no one. A quiet seamstress. Skilled, yes, but easily forgotten. The bribe from Khalees had been generous, and her company, well, he was not a young man, and loneliness had softened his sense of right and wrong. He had told himself it was harmless. That a girl like Lena would not suffer overly much. That house arrest was a kindness compared to true imprisonment. But now the prince himself had noticed. The judge wiped his brow. Sweat gathered at his collar. His political future, what little remained of it, now teetered. He sent for his assistant immediately. "Prepare a summons," he barked. "Lena Merrill is to be brought here, no delay. I want guards with her but gentle. No chains." The assistant hesitated. "But, the previous orders are null," the judge snapped. "This comes from the palace." And like a match dropped into dry hay, the news spread through the village. Lena, still sitting at her embroidery frame, was startled by the sound of boots outside her home. This time when the guards approached there was no sneer. No heavy-handed grip. One of them actually nodded. "You're to come with us," said Tom, the younger one. "Back to the court." Lena stood slowly. "Has something changed?" He swallowed. "Everything." She was given a moment to wash her face and put on her best dress, the one with the mended hem and the stitched cuffs. She tucked her thread work neatly into her satchel. If they were sending her back to court, she would go on her terms, quietly but not small. As they walked her through the village, people stepped aside. Not out of fear but curiosity. Reverence. Some of the same villagers who had turned their backs now gave shy nods. One woman offered a roll of bread. Another handed her a daisy. When they reached the court steps, Lena paused. Inside, the hall smelled the same, parchment, candle wax and something sour, but the air had shifted. The judge was already seated at his desk, his robes ironed and straight, his face set in a performance of fairness. "Miss Merrill," he said, voice oily, "I understand there has been a misunderstanding. Please come in. Sit." She did, wary. Khalees was already there, though no longer lounging like before. She was pale, her lips tight. At her side, her mother whispered rapidly, glancing toward the guards at the doorway as if calculating how to escape. "I've received a letter," the judge continued, "from the palace." "I heard," Lena said softly. "The prince sent it." He shifted in his chair. "Indeed. It seems there was an oversight. Your case must be reviewed again. Fairly. With full consideration of new evidence." He emphasized the word like it was a shield. Khalees' voice burst out. "This is madness. She's manipulating everyone. She's nothing but a village stitcher with pretty thread and empty hands." "Enough," the judge said quickly, casting a nervous glance toward the guard. "Let us proceed." The reevaluation began. This time, no one interrupted Lena as she spoke. She recounted how the cloak had come to her. How she'd worked on it carefully, secretly adding her initials and the royal seal into the lining, not for vanity but so her mark might last. She told them about the letter. How she never saw it again after Khalees found it. "I wasn't proud for praise," she said. "I was proud to be useful." There was silence. Then a new voice spoke. One that hadn't been expected. "I can confirm some of that," said a woman from the crowd. "The village midwife." She stepped forward, eyes firm. "I've known that girl since birth. Helped her mother when she was born. She was quiet but always good. I also treated her weeks ago, after Khalees threw something at her." "That's hearsay." Khalees snapped. But the midwife didn't falter. "If you want to talk about rumors, let's discuss the guard you bribed." The room stirred. The judge coughed loudly. "That won't be necessary." "It is," said a voice from the doorway. Everyone turned. Prince Thalen stepped into the room. Behind him, Captain Wren followed, scrolls in hand. The judge leapt to his feet. "Your Highness, I was not informed." "I wanted to see for myself," the prince said calmly. He looked at Lena. "Please. Continue." Lena rose, uncertain, but found her voice steady. "I did not steal anything," she said. "I was accused without trial, punished without proof." The prince nodded once. Then he turned to Wren. "The evidence?" She handed him the scrolls. "Statements from townspeople," he said. "A signed confession from the palace laundress who found the embroidery. Letters from your assistant, judge, confirming the unusual speed of Lena's conviction." The judge paled. There was pressure. Misinformation. "There was corruption," the prince corrected. "But we are not here for vengeance. Only truth." Lena's throat tightened. She looked to Khalees, who now looked smaller than she ever had. Not just humiliated but exposed. Her stepmother grasped her wrist as if to pull her back into a lie, but no one believed them now. "Khalees Merrill," the prince said, "you are not to be harmed. But you will stand trial. Publicly. Let the truth be known." He looked to the judge last. "And you, Your Honor, will resign." The judge opened his mouth, closed it, then bowed. The prince turned to Lena. "You've been wronged. But more than that, you've shown what integrity looks like in silence." Lena bowed her head. "I only ever wanted to stitch what was good." He smiled faintly. And you have. Far more than you know. As she left the court that day, the village watched not with pity, but with respect. Even the guards stepped aside for her, no longer wardens but escorts. That night, Khalees and her mother were quietly removed from the manor. Not in chains, but in plain carriages under guard. They would stand trial in the capital just like anyone else. And the judge, once a man who wielded his position with smug superiority, packed his books into a worn satchel and walked alone out the court gates, face hidden beneath his hood. No one stopped to watch him go. In the manor, Lena returned to her small room. She touched the frame where her half-finished embroidery lay. The pattern had shifted slightly now. She picked up her needle and began a new line, one that twisted not with pain but release. Outside, the prince's carriage remained at the inn. He would stay the night before returning to the capital. But already, a message had been sent back ahead of him. A girl with silver thread and hidden courage had stitched her name into the legacy of a kingdom. Not with scandal. Not with pride. With truth. And from this point on, the courts would remember her, not as a girl accused, but as the one who reminded them what justice looked like when the shame was not hers to carry. The morning was gray with mist when the guards came to carry out the sentence. Lena stood in the doorway of her home, wrists already bound with cloth, more a symbol than true restraint. Her face was pale but calm. She had not slept. All night, she had sewn and unsewn a single patch of embroidery, her fingers working more from instinct than hope. She had known this day would come, had tried to prepare her heart for it, but dread clung to her like fog. Khalees stood at the edge of the courtyard, smiling faintly beneath her veil. Dressed in her finest, she looked less like a grieving sister and more like a woman prepared to step over someone else's ruin. Her mother stood behind her, whispering something too low to hear. Lena didn't look their way. The judge, still flushed with the fear of losing his position, had moved quickly after the hearing. Despite the prince's inquiries and growing rumors, the sentence had not yet been officially overturned. Orders had already been written. A final signature remained. The guard stepped forward. Then came the sound of hooves. Fast. Urgent. A rider cut through the mist like a blade, the palace seal gleaming on his saddlebag. He pulled the reins hard as he reached the square, dismounted in a single fluid motion, and strode directly toward the judge. A message, he declared, lifting the scroll high. From His Royal Highness, Prince Thalen. Urgent. The crowd stilled. Even the judge took a half-step back before reaching out. The courier didn't let go. I am instructed to ensure it is read aloud, he said firmly. In front of all present. The judge hesitated. Then, nodding stiffly, he cleared his throat and cracked the seal. His voice trembled as he began to read. To the magistrate and all officials of the district court, he recited, let it be known that Lena Merrill, seamstress of Hillcrest Hollow, is to be placed under immediate royal protection. She is to be escorted to the palace without delay or interference. The crowd gasped. Khalees froze. The judge continued, each word louder now, his voice steadier, though his eyes darted toward the stunned noblewomen at the side of the court, and the townsfolk gathering in growing numbers. It has come to the attention of the crown that recent proceedings against her were tainted by falsehoods and partial judgment. Until a full investigation is complete, she is to be considered a guest of the realm and held blameless. The letter ended with the prince's personal seal and signature. The judge lowered the scroll. For a long hanging breath, no one moved. Then Lena's bindings were cut. The cloth fell to the ground limp, harmless. Khalees stepped forward suddenly, her face pale but furious. This is some trick, some forgery. That can't be. But the courier turned toward her, unfazed. The prince himself penned it. I stood beside him as the wax was pressed. The guards did not even glance her way. Their attention was on Lena now, and it had changed. No longer the bored tolerance of forced duty but quiet reverence. You're safe now, one of them said to her. We'll see you to the palace. Lena opened her mouth to speak but found no words. Her knees threatened to buckle, not from fear or even relief but from the sheer weight of it. The tide had turned. She hadn't expected it. Hadn't dared. Khalees stood trembling, lips parted in shock. Her mother clutched her arm, pulling her back into the shadows of the archway. As Lena was led forward, the crowd parted for her, not like a criminal but like someone important. Like someone seen. A few of the villagers even bowed their heads. At the edge of the square, the carriage that had once been meant to carry her to prison now opened its door for a different reason. Velvet cushions. Royal insignia. Lena turned once just before stepping inside. Khalees was still watching her. And now she understood. This hadn't just been about embroidery or reputation. Khalees had feared something deeper, that the girl she tried to erase might one day be recognized for who she truly was. Not a threat to her comfort, but a mirror to her falsehood. The courier climbed into the front of the carriage and gave the signal. As the wheels turned and the square began to shrink behind them, Lena rested her hands on her lap and finally breathed. Not all letters change a life. But this one had come first. And it had come in time.